Well, we'll get into our first story. So this is from Newsweek.com. Chelsea Handler has divided the internet thanks to her skit about enjoying life without children. Called A Day in the Life of a Childless Woman, the video follows Handler on her daily routine as she narrates her comically exaggerated habits. Quote, I wake up at 6 a.m. I remember that I have no kids to take to school, so I take an edible, masturbate, and go back to sleep, she starts. I wake up at 12:30 p.m. and get ready for a busy day doing whatever the F I feel like. Handler continues, I put on my most impractical and stylish shoes since I won't be chasing a child around the grocery store. Then, during her joke about popping to Paris for a croissant, she says, I do a meditation sesh on the plane since I have no screaming kids, allowing me all the time in the world to become enlightened. The weightlessness of my existence has granted me superhuman powers. Handler then says she teleports back home to get ready for a night out with whatever hot guy she met on dating app Raya that day, and the text on her phone reads, Wanna F tonight. She continues by saying she scaled Mount Everest for exercise and invents a time machine to go back in history to kill Hitler. It's amazing what you can do when you have this much free time, she concludes, before adding, and that's a day in the life of a childless woman. So there's a lot to respond to there, but we'll go to Mr. C.R.Wiley first for your initial reaction.
Well, she sounds weightless, if you know what I mean. That's actually, she's apparently unaware that that's not a positive thing. So weightlessness means you lack substance. And she's using this sort of image to imply that she is not weighed down with care, or with responsibilities, but when in fact she's light in the worst way. When a person, so like when we say I can take you lightly, means that you don't have substance, you don't have weight. The only way you acquire weight is by undertaking difficult tasks and being a responsible person. And she's not pursuing it from the sound of it. Now, she's making fun. Maybe she's making fun of herself a little bit, but I don't know how old she is. What's our guess? What's her age?
57.
She's 57. Well, I think she's lying in a number of respects. I know a number of middle-aged older women, and sort of in her sort of stage of life, and they're not happy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm talking about childless career women.
Right. Yeah. Well, Michael, what was your initial reaction? Because you've got quite a face on right now.
She presents that material as if it's something that should be desired, and I receive it as if it's just the worst possible outcome for a life. I would hate to think that my life provided so little purpose that I am left with nothing but to wake up and masturbate and meditate so that I can achieve some self-perspective that allows me to think that I've achieved something great, when in fact I have nothing that I'm responsible for and nobody that depends on me. That doesn't seem like that's something to flaunt. I think it's just confusing all in all, and largely because my worldview is in stark contrast to this individual's. So yeah, it's sad to think that someone would live in such a way. And kind of like what Chris was saying, she may be making fun of herself a little bit, but it seems to be masking some deep insecurities.
Yeah. Well, Joey, this is a topic that's pretty relevant to you since you are just about on the beginning of your journey into fatherhood. So what was your initial thought?
Well, I'd say it sounds like she's masking how miserable she maybe really is inside, because I witnessed my wife, and I see her being a wife and about to become a mother, and it's definitely how women were designed. What the job they were designed to do.
Yeah. And really a correction, she is a mother already, we should say, if we're
correct. Yes.
Being correct.
Mother Baby's to a child not yet earthbound.
Well, earthbound even.
Well, earthbound,
not yet
not out of the womb.
Not yet out of the womb. There we go. We probably get our terms straight.
Couple
here,
more
but
days.
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
days now?
Yeah, I think we're about a week and a half out from due date.
Oh, cool.
So awesome to see. So Chris, we'll go to you first, but why do you think that this is such a recurring message that specifically pop culture and Hollywood is pushing on individuals?
Well, I suspect that it has to do with a need to reassure women that the decisions they've made were good ones.
Mhm.
And I think the other guys have brought up good points about the doubts that she may be wrestling with along that line. I don't have to get up and I guess reassure myself that things I've been engaged with or the commitments I've made are still valuable or worthwhile. I deal with kind of the outcomes of some real blessings in my life. I've got 3 grown kids and I've got grandchildren. And like I noted, I'm 60 years old, so this woman is, she's a member of my generation, you could say. And I know many women like her, and I think that they're starting to see the consequences of the choices they've made. So good choices very often have a front end or front loaded with a lot of difficulty, and then you enjoy the benefits or the sort of the returns down the road. When you have small children, there's a lot of work, and there's a lot of worry, and there's a lot of uncertainty. You just don't know how things are going to work out. And of course, in God's providence, it's ordered by the Lord, but nevertheless, from the perspective on the ground, there's just a lot of question marks. But when things work out well, you understand what we see in the Old Testament with regard to the references to the blessings that you enjoy when you have children and grandchildren. And furthermore, she's counting on a number of social systems and economic sort of institutions to provide for her in her old age that she's taken for granted. And I don't think that she's factored into her thinking the possibilities that those things could let her down. And I think that they will. And we're starting to see the evidence of that. I just read today that Social Security is going to go insolvent before they thought it was. This is the way these people operate. they don't want to let you know the truth until it's already too late. And when it comes to Social Security, basically there's no lockbox out there. There's no like savings account with your name on it. What comes in now goes out now. So we're in a baby bust situation. Fewer people are paying in, more people are drawing down. I don't think what we're going to see with Social Security is a significant decrease in benefits and a significant increase in the age at which you can acquire those benefits or enjoy those benefits. And when it comes to the stock market, which is what 401ks and other retirement vehicles are relying on, just in the past year and a half, people have seen those balance sheets dramatically alter in a negative way, and it was a real wake-up call. One day, you're feeling on top of the world because you got a 401k with a balance of $1.5 million, and half a year later, you're down to $500,000. I'm not exaggerating. That's the way it's been for a lot of older people. So, she's made a bet, and I think she's made a bad bet.
Yeah. So, when it comes to like the biblical perspective, do you think that individuals who are making that bet, do you think that they are ultimately just missing the mark in terms of what the family structure is from a biblical perspective?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that they really do think that they can. I think that the hubris of the modern outlook is that we can reinvent the world. That human nature is plastic, that it's malleable, it's something that can be altered at a fundamental level. And I think that they believe that we have the wherewithal to create new structures that are to our, sort of appeal to us. And they more or less reject the givenness of things. They really don't want to receive the world as it's made. They want to remake it.
Yeah. What do you think changed that caused this new atmosphere of sort of revolutionary change being desired among, especially, I mean, the young individuals in America are definitely embracing a lot of those ideas, but beyond just the youth, we see Chelsea Handler's 57 and she's actively promoting these lifestyle choices that ultimately are going to leave many men and women childless, dying by themselves with no one around to take care of them in their old age.
Yeah, and the institutions that they rely upon unable to provide the care that they think they will, because those institutions rely on younger people to staff them and fund them. But anyway, it goes back quite a way. I could take you back to the late medieval era and talk about the origins of modernity and the rise of nominalism in the 14th century. But but it's in other words, I'm having a little fun here. The roots go way back. It's not the 1960s. It's not even the French Revolution. It goes way back. And there's been a lot of really good work in the last, I'd say, 50 years on the intellectual history of the West, and people like Augusto Del Noce, Philip Reef, just really world class. I mean, I think there are people. Charles Taylor, for example, in his book, what's that book called? It's not Modern Age, but anyway, it just goes to show that I don't think much about him. I can't remember the name of his book. But he's kind of second tier. I mean, I think that we know what happened. And it was some bad ideas that bubbled up from the world of theology. And we see the tremors, or I should say it's sort of like a theological tsunami, and people will try to identify, something that happened in the early 60s with, no prayer in public schools, or, abortion on demand or something like that. All those are effects. Mm-hmm. It goes much further back, and it goes back to theology, not even philosophy. Philosophy is actually kind of secondary. So anyway, this is stuff I think about all the time and I write about. I don't want to be tedious, but it goes back a ways.
Well, Chris, you're talking about a evolution of thought that is, I think, from what you're talking about, is more of a macroevolution over the past centuries. What I would say in this circumstance, there's a big push in our contemporary culture to not have children. There's shaming for families that have more than one children or desire more than one child. I think there's a thread that can be followed in a microevolution, a more focal spectrum, like you're saying, even in the 60s, that churches separated from state in such a way that there cannot be religious experience in the school setting. Or in my own experience and our experience shared, the movies that were being published and put out throughout the early late 90s, there were a lot of movies that the sole and purpose of the movie was to say that families that have divorced parents, it's okay, and the children are going to be okay. They're still loved, which isn't wrong in and of itself, but it put divorced parents on this pedestal that makes it out to be normal. And once that level of dysfunction in a family unit has been brought to normalcy, then what's the next step and the next step and the next step? And now we look at the family normalcy of, yeah, sure, maybe there's two dads and they've adopted a child and are grooming them to be a gender that they were not born into. We've come such a long distance in a short time from the traditional family that I think our grandparents were familiar with. And already, let's say 100 years later, that traditional family has been disrupted by economic crisis, by cultural crisis, and now I think we're in a place where it seems that there's a big shift in ideology, a shift in purpose, where a lot of people are subscribing to that form of thinking that they shouldn't have children, or that they are better off not having children, or having a committed relationship or monogamous relationship to one individual a long term. Instead, we're degrading these functions that have kept our society alive since the beginning of time. And Connor, when you say like the biblical implications, it makes me think, okay, well, yes, there are biblical prerogatives to what a marriage is and the blessing of having children. But there's also cultural norms that were at place at the time of the writing of Scripture, where I would say a 56-year-old single woman who had never married would be be seen more as a burden on society than a success by any rate throughout most of history. And feel free to disagree. I think that's
right. Yeah, I think that's right. I've written on those themes, and I think you're right. I don't have any disagreements with anything you said. I think in terms of how this is all felt and experienced in our time, you're absolutely right. In terms of the near term developments, I'm from a broken home. I grew up in the 60s, so my childhood was a childhood that was that occurred within the sort of in the boundaries or the penumbra of college campuses. My father was a junior faculty at University of Buffalo and later at Washington U in St. Louis, and so I know that kind of scene. And the me generation was something I experienced firsthand. So I think you're absolutely right. And what we're seeing play out is a kind of script that has an outcome that I think we all kind of know, but it seems as though we're in the middle of the story and it's just got to have to play itself out. I wish I could say otherwise. Now, I happen to be in a situation where I defied all of that all the way along, and basically I had the benefit of growing up in a kind of bohemian environment surrounded by progressive idiots. And because that's the case, I always knew that they were full of it. So I very intentionally set myself, decided to pursue sort of a quest to understand the world that they were deconstructing, and discovered that it was better than the world that they were trying to create. By the way, I pastor a church with very large families. I've got one elder with 13 kids, another with 12, another with 9, and another with 7, and another with 5, and he's just getting started. So
that's great. I like to hear that. It's encouraging.
Yeah, that's very encouraging. Joey, it looks like you were going to say something.
Well, I'm just wondering too, with our current culture of instant satisfaction and indulgence, if that has sort of greased the wheels, so to speak, to kind of make this sort of mindset even more prevalent in our day, in the current time, because that's kind of how, especially I think in the next 10 or 15 years or so, we're going to have a generation that their whole life has grown up with instant satisfaction and constant dopamine triggers in their day-to-day. So I don't know if, I don't know what I'm getting at there. Just an observation.
Yeah. Well, you see it even just with our social media. I mean, just from the time that we all, all three of us were growing up, we were kind of the first generation that really grew up with social media. You know, wasn't there on our early years, but kind of middle school and up, we had access to social media. And you look at the development from YouTube to suddenly you got these bite-sized TikToks that are like, you know, 10 seconds to 60 seconds tops in their length. I mean, that already the attention spans of the youth is actually going down. That's been proven by multiple studies. And the only thing that's encouraging is on the flip side, there's almost this completely different world that has developed, which is long form podcasts like this have kind of taken off. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure if that's just two different worlds that are growing at once, or if there's a lot of crossover in those worlds. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about that.
Well, Scripture tells us the wheat and the tares grow together. So yes, it's a really bad time, but it's also a really great time. My sons, my children, all three of my children are grown and have done hard things and are accomplished people. And my two sons are married, own their own houses, have kids. So it's possible. They're basically the age of you guys, and so I'm old enough to be your father. But so there are people like yourselves and like my sons that are out there, and so there are a lot of great people still out there. And one of the, there are a lot of things that we can note that are kind of downsides to the internet, social media, and stuff like that. One upside is this conversation we're having. I've never met you guys. It's my first time with you. I'm glad to be with you.
Likewise.
Well, what's interesting though, and maybe this is just my own anecdotal observations, but it feels like, at least, and maybe it's dangerous for me to say feels, but it seems to me like there is starting to be a shift in a positive direction. Just in terms of the way that the public is viewing a lot of the lies that our culture has been selling them. I actually think that, like, the transgender movement, for example, is one that I see right now actively being pushed back upon. I would say, maybe I'm wrong about this because I don't have numbers to this, but it seems like the public at large is starting to push back on transgenderism. And that was not even a thing, honestly, even a couple of years ago. And I don't think that this is the only catalyst, but I think one of the main turning points was honestly Matt Walsh's What is a Woman documentary. I do think that changed the conversation. I think it made a lot more people a lot more bold about how they approach transgenderism. And obviously transgenderism is a whole different path from childless lifestyles, but it's still ultimately that self-serving lifestyle that we're talking about. But I don't know. Maybe that's just my observation, but do you guys feel like there's been a change in that? Because to me, it seems like the average person is a lot more fed up with transgenderism, for example, than they were even like a year, 2 years ago.
I think it may have to do with your relevant scope of understanding. In your circumstance, Connor, for example, you consume a lot of conservative media, specifically just by nature of what you're interested in and who you listen to. And there's a narrative there that's going to be more aware of the opposition to a lot of the more liberal leftist agenda of transgender, abortion rights, things like this. Whereas I do know that in a lot of, say, for example, state university campuses that are under the tutorship of more liberal-leaning faculty members, they're being affirmed in their sexual identities as they are fluidly changing. They may have a different experience because of their scope of understanding or their scope of influence. So I feel like we are seeing more pushback, and I think that may just be the increased dichotomy that exists in our culture, where as one side of the aisle is emboldened to be more aggressive, more forward about certain things of marketing campaigns about transgenderism or ad campaigns about abortion rights and how it's loving your neighbor to allow them to have an abortion. Clearly, that's going to trigger some responses, and it will elicit a strong response from a conservative Christian community that is against those things. So what I'm seeing, at least, is that while one side of the aisle is becoming more hard pressed, then they're going to respond more aggressively as well. So while, yes, it's encouraging to see that people are not willing to just take it on the chin when it comes to these ideological differences, I think it can also be a sign of strengthening in the opposition as well.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to what you say, Michael. I mean, I lived in Cambridge for a decade, right between Harvard and MIT. I went to Harvard Divinity School. I think I'm pretty personally connected with both sides of this matter. It's remarkable how people can double down on dumb, and I don't think that we're going to resolve these matters in a kind of deliberative mode. I think what's going to happen is cultural crisis is going to sort of create conditions in which people have to decide what's real, and the implications of their choices will follow. So if they continue to pursue the lifestyle that this woman is trying to, I guess, valorize, they're going to basically either be euthanized or just die lonely and forgotten.
Yeah. So what kind of event needs to take place for that decision to be made?
Well, I think it could be anything, but I suspect it'll be a economic crisis of a scale that we've not seen before.
Yeah. One of your books, I believe you focus in on kind of what you would do to survive the end of the world. Is that right?
Yep.
Could you tell us more about that?
Well, most stuff that you read in sort of the survivalist literature is basically it's beans, bullets, and bunkers. Basically, the strategy is I'm going to hole up in a hole in the ground and have a lot of ammo and eat canned goods, and that's just crazy. Eventually you have to come out. Then you got to rebuild, and furthermore, your shelter is one that isolates you, prevents, keeps you from being constructively engaged with other people. So what we need is communities, small communities, high trust communities. Generally, those high trust communities develop most readily within family and household structures and within common sets of convictions, like communities that form around those, like churches. We should look at the Jews. I mean, the Jews, they're just sui generis. I mean, there's nobody like them. And they've survived everything that you could throw at them. And so I think there's insight there. Now, sometimes liberal Jews have forgotten what their own history teaches them. Some of the worst sort of Jews are the progressive Jews who basically have embraced a different form of genocide. They don't have kids, but I'm talking about traditional Jews. I've got lots of friends who are Jews, and I've got good relationships with them. And I admire their resilience, and I think there are lessons for us to take from their experience.
Yeah. And what was the name of that book, if any listeners are interested in picking it up?
Oh, Man in the House, I think, is the one you're referring to.
Yeah, that sounds right. That's awesome. So, from your perspective, high trust communities for the sake of outlasting economic or social turmoil.
Yeah, I mean, um, the idea that we can all just sort of be little islands of consciousness is just stupid. I mean, we're social creatures. We're enriched through our interactions with each other. We need each other. Um, and anybody who says otherwise is out of touch with reality.